To be or not to be. For the first time, apprentices of arrested Bulat Atabayev performed the avalanche of fear without the stage director at their side. It's all quiet on the Western Front. A new lethal shootout is reported in Aktobe. The Faculty of Useless Knowledge. Museum business in Kazakhstan, its mission and purpose.
Vlast KZ.
Hello, I'm Asylbek Abdulov and you're watching Vlast KZ on KPLUS channel. Trends, highlights and personalities of the past week. Throughout the past week, conflicting information was reported about the fate of recently arrested stage director Bulat Atabayev and politician Janbulat Mamay. On Wednesday, it was said that the charges of inciting social hatred were replaced with accusations of attempting the overthrow of government and constitutional order. On late Thursday night, users on social networks wrote that Atabayev and Mamay will be released in the courtroom of Aktau court. Allegedly, the case was settled and everyone needed to wait until Friday morning. On Friday morning, however, it became apparent that the information was false and no one was released. According to sister of Bulat Atabayev, defendants disagreed to testify against the leader of Alga Party, Vladimir Kozlov, and therefore their release process has been suspended. Website Respublika assumes that the defendants were escorted out of the detention center to meet with the staff of the NSC, who came from Astana. They asked Atabayev and Mamay for detailed testimonies against Vladimir Kozlov, Muratbek Kitibayev and Mukhtar Ablazov. The investigators are trying to slant facts and participants of the case in favor of the official theory, which seems to be approved by higher-ups. According to Kozlov's wife Aliya, the main goal of the accusation against her husband is to prove that Ablazov, in cooperation with Kitibayev, created an organized criminal group in 2003. Allegedly, under the guise of party creation and at Ablazov orders, Kozlov himself organized a criminal group called Alga Party to overthrow the constitutional order and to seize power. The investigation wants to support these accusations with testimonies by Atabayev and Mamay, but since they were not released, it looks like the activists didn't strike a needed deal. Stage director Bulat Atabayev has become a character of a tragic piece, still unfolding in real life. This play is a classic with heroes, sufferings, crowds of supporters and those unconcerned. We all hope that in the end the tragic piece will have a happy ending. As a modest contribution to inconsistent choir of protest against persecution of the artist and in support of Bulat Atabayev, here's a part from the legendary staging of Hamlet by Taganka Theatre Troupe, directed by dissident Yuri Lyubimov, one of Atabayev's favorite directors.
Достойно терпеть безропотно позор судьбы, или нужно оказать сопротивление? Гул затих, я вышел на подмостки, прислонясь к дверному косяку. Я ловлю в далеком отголоске, что случится на моем веку. Но продуман распорядок действий и неотвратим конец пути. Я один, все тонет в фарисействе, жизнь прожить, не поле перейти.
Unpleasantly, too few people came out to see the play Avalanche of Fear in honor of Bulat Atabayev, which was put on by his students for the first time in the director's absence. Of course, this worries me because today's show revolves around the events occurring with Bulat Atabayev. Those who love his art will come to visit us. However, the audience gathered inside the small porch of the German theater, not only for the love of art. Has it been long since you visited the theater? Yes, my daughter, a long time. I came to the show in support of Bulat Atabayev. He's my son's colleague. The next day, Mamay Bekhojiv flew to his 24-year-old son's trial in Aktau. After the play Avalanche, the elder could hardly contain his tears while addressing the audience. He said it is better to die free than live life on your knees, which is what the play is about. Almost nothing takes place in the first part of Act 1. Actors cast long yawns right at the audience, hold long monologues in a half-whisper about the pregnancy of their relatives, lament and wrap themselves in blankets. It is a recognizable atmosphere of destitute and stagnation. Atabayev seems to have been experiencing similar feelings in 2009, when the law on the national leader was being adopted. No, this is not the turning point, unfortunately. It has to take place inside our souls. That's when the earth will crack under your feet. That's when I will live in a critical moment. For him, the turning point was Zhanozyan. Zhanozyan changed me. When a month passed since the start of the strike, I became interested. Yet Kazbayev once said we have no civil society. He was right. There were signs, but there was no civil society. Zhanozyan residents spearheaded the process. Like a true artist, Atabayev acutely felt the moment, which he paid for later. Not much has changed inside the kitchen of many of his fellow citizens since the sleepy mid-2000s. Time there flows slower, like in the first act of the play. For a police officer, Nazarbayev is the only best candidate. He even admires that he does not read from a card. The officer grew up with the president, and it is inconceivable that someone else may be on the throne. When I ask, are you satisfied with the wages? He says, no, it's not enough. Why do you think? The economy is weak. The best and only president is strong, but the economy is weak. Why do you think it is so? He keeps silent, ponders, and starts another topic. These letters from behind bars were addressed by opposition politician Vladimir Kozlov to his wife Aliya. This week, the fate of all the main political suspects in the Zhanozyan process crossed in Aktau. While Atabayev was transported to Aktau, he suffered a hypertensive crisis on the road. It becomes clear why after reading Kozlov's letters. I heard the name of the prison coach Stolypin for the first time. That is the only way it is called here. Stolypin is a type of car compartment, but not compartmentalized. Where there is a wall with doors, stand bars with the same door made out of bars. Where there is a window, stands a blank wall. No tables, wood instead of shelves, 3 on each wall. No luggage rack either. 7 shelves for 7 people in each compartment. The middle one folds out into 2. It becomes a solid roof over those sleeping underneath. There are 16 of us inside this compartment. Vladimir Kozlov calls Aktau center and home in his letters. Relatives of Atabayev and Mamai stood in front of the Aktau court all Friday. Rumors spread that morning that they would both be released. However, Bulat Atabayev was offered freedom in exchange for testimony against oppositionist Kozlov. Previously, he was shown the entire severity of the penitentiary system, a rough arrest and harsh conditions of the transport under guard. Earlier negotiations with Vladimir Ivanovich went along the same line.
Переговоры идут, они идут достаточно часто. Вот именно нужны показания именно по Мухтару Аблязову.
Negotiations are held quite often. They need testimonies over Mukhtar Ablazov. In exchange, they guarantee freedom. However, Vladimir said that several years in prison are not worth changing my views and betraying my friends. I just saw this and I was stunned. That there are 2.8 by 0.8 centimeter windows inside the cell. They're very low, about my height. 4 rows of different gratings in the windows, 3 from the side and the 4th from outside. There's a 40 centimeter space between them, and there's a dove who made a nest and is now hatching chicks. It is dreadfully symbolic, a sign of peace and freedom between 2 rows of bars. Who will these little pigeons become, being born in prison? The climax of the play, entitled Avalanche, is also about birth. The severe court must make a ruling. Should the main character give birth or not? The absurdity of the situation is explained by the laws of nature, which say that the sound of the new mother's screaming will wake an avalanche, which could fall on the village. Therefore, even giving birth is possible only with permission, let alone dying, which is done by court's decision. Verdict, verdict, verdict. This woman shall be buried alive. Verdict. Next, in accordance with theater law, everything happens very quickly. The birth-giving woman's husband takes aim at the judges. The woman gives birth, the newborn screams, but the avalanche does not come down. Villagers are stunned. They begin talking loudly and banish the judges, along with some absurd official in a tie. This is where art ends. The audience applauded and cried. In violation of Aksaray theater tradition, the director did not come out to the audience after the show.
Ну, конечно, это нечто новое, явление новое.
It's certainly something new. It makes you wonder about everything what happens. It makes you take some sort of responsibility for everything that happens around you. It must be said that taking over civil responsibility for what is happening is not the task of the artist. Atabayev's close colleagues in the theatrical business retain that stance. Yesmukhan Ubayev, artistic director of the Mukhtar Awezov Kazakh Drama Theater. He staged it 2 years ago here. He has his own theater, but he has no stage, only a working troupe. He rented a small hall last year to stage 2 plays. He's a good, incisive man, but I do not know what else he does, what kind of arrest, what he's accused of. I'm not in the know. Rubin Andreasyan, chief director of Lermontov Theater. What can I say about Bulat Atabayev? He's a talented man. He entered politics, but I never delved into political affairs and have no idea. But he's enthusiastic and talented. That is all I can say about him. To be honest, I do not answer political questions. In a way, you're barking up the wrong tree. I do not want to go into politics. Unlike his colleagues, the Aksaray Theater director never had any doubts about who is sent on stage by art. Culture wants to understand nature. Once you want to understand nature, you cannot help but dive into certain depths. And once you dive into certain depths, you are in breach of certain status quos and dogmas. You cannot reach understanding otherwise.
Another round of dissenters' arrests took place last week in Almaty. By the decision of the administrative court, the youth activists Inga Imanbay and Anara Abildayeva were placed under 10-day arrests for taking part in an unsanctioned rally. On June 15th, civil activists who founded the committee Arasha in defense of Bulat Atabayev and Janbolat Mamay organized a protest in front of the NSC building in Almaty. On that day, the defendants were transferred to Aktau, and during a whole week, the 60-year-old Bulat Atabayev, who suffers from diabetes, was balancing between life and death. For the past few years, the director has been walking on the edge. Up next, the interview with Atabayev recorded before the Zhanaozen tragedy, which played a key role in his fate.
Сыгравший в судьбе Атабаева ключевую роль.
I understood that later when I ended up in the German theater, that like-mindedness is an attribute of lack of culture. There is no like-mindedness. As Fazil Iskander used to say, collective stink is not a sign of unity of soul. What is opposition? Opposition is a different point of view. Also an opinion, but different, as a nature which doesn't sustain like-mindedness. The natural state of nature is dissent. People say that I try to tell the truth. This is not for someone. This is for me myself. So I don't live like a slave, so I can live with a raised chin. I need truth. Then I met with the late filmmaker Askar Takpanov. He was one of the first filmmakers of Kazakhstan, but it took long for me to understand him. I was afraid of him and I was avoiding him. Many people hated him, saying that he was a Lucifer. My teacher Mambetov used to say that Takpanov is a Lucifer. I used to repeat my teacher and say the same thing. But later when I perceived him, I understood that he was voluntarily playing a role of a negative character because all the rest of the roles were taken already. So he was in a way an aid man, and I liked that. Saying truth is one thing, but at the same time, one needs to keep polite. Rudeness and truth lay close. This is what Takpanov told me in the hospital before his death, and looked at me with a slick glance. Ability to tell the truth is an art. I'm not always able to do that. Problems already emerge. I'm already an accused and attend interrogations by the National Security Committee. I see how people work. I see an investigator who does his job well and remains polite. But at the same time, I see police officers like one from Zhanaozen named Nurlan, who works with such passion and frenzy and searches for enemies of the regime of Kazakhstan. I look at him and I see year 1937. Here you go. These people don't understand that dissent is also patriotism. He thinks that if he was ordered by his superior, he now has the passion to pressure people with pleasure as if he's gambling. I see that. Of course, I'm against that pressure and I become rude sometimes. This is the issue of morality. I'm not afraid of being jailed, absolutely. I don't want to be a hero, and I'm not trying to be a hero. People select heroes. I know myself that I'm not a hero. Pity the country that needs heroes, as was written by Bertolt Brecht. This is unnecessary. Our people are making me a hero. I receive phone calls from Russia, Germany, Ukraine. They're following the situation, and even from Georgia. They're interested whether I was jailed or not. You know, people need a hero. They want to draw this picture. They want to think that I'm a hero. I don't need that. This is just another legacy of the Soviet Union. The hero of the Soviet Union. Kalık Kahramanı. Isn't it ridiculous? Who are we deceiving? All these titles. Unfortunately, this is the sign of immaturity of our society. We're still searching for leaders. Normal, self-confident people don't search for leaders. Look at Russia. 120,000 people entered the square. They are not following any leaders. It was their own choice. Even Putin admitted that. For how long we should work for the leader and be their bargaining chip. I don't need that. I know what I want. I'm not saying that I am Kazakh patriot. I have grandchildren, nephews, relatives, friends, and their children. I want all these kids to live in a normal society. I don't have high goals like fighting for the universal happiness of Kazakh people. I don't have such goals. Maybe I have not reached that level yet. I want my grandchildren to live in a normal, civilized country where laws work well. I want my students to live in normal conditions and so that they are not ashamed. I don't want my grandchildren to question me in the future and asking me questions like, "Grandpa, what were you doing? What type of society have you left? What is the meaning of life now?" That's why I think that someone has to be in opposition and tell the truth.
Кто-то должен быть противным и говорить правду.
Next on Vlast KZ. It's all quiet on the Western Front. A new lethal shootout is reported in Aktabe. The Faculty of Useless Knowledge. Museum business in Kazakhstan, its mission and purpose. We'll return with Vlast KZ in a couple of minutes.
Главные события в Казахстане. Достоверные факты. Эксклюзивные комментарии. Читайте в Казахстане информационно-аналитический портал «Республика». Чтобы обойти блокировки, воспользуйтесь доменом respublikas.info. Вы окажетесь на так называемом прокси-портале. Специально разработанные канадскими специалистами по интернет-технологиям, прокси-порталы помогают пользователям получать информацию в тех странах, где блокируют интернет-ресурсы. В Китае, Иране, в Казахстане. Вы принимаете условия использования системы и попадаете на страницу информационно-аналитического портала «Республика». Материалы интернет-портала также доступны пользователям всемирной сети Facebook. facebook.com/respublika.kaz. Если вы хотите поделиться информацией, вам есть что рассказать, звоните в редакцию «Республики». Наши телефоны в Казахстане +7 727 273 92 95, в Москве +7 495 621 87 03.
Новости Казахстана на казахском языке смотрите в 21:00 и далее каждый нечетный час. Новости Казахстана на русском языке в 22:00 и далее каждый четный час. Новости Казахстана на английском языке смотрите в 16:30, 17:30, 18:30 и 19:30 со вторника по субботу. Время Астаны. Изготовление и размещение рекламы на канале KplusTV.
Первый в истории Казахстана многопартийный парламент.
This past week, newspapers officially announced that the first multi-party parliament in the history of Kazakhstan closed its first session. According to the Speaker of the Parliament, the main outcome of the last session was the adoption of laws that primarily contribute to the effective implementation of key moments pointed out in the public address of President Nursultan Nazarbayev.
Нурсултана Абишевича Назарбаева народу Казахстана.
The speaker also described the session as a special one because, for the first time, the MPs worked under new conditions of a multi-party system. Indeed, the session and the parliament itself were special, given the indifference of MPs to the issues of common citizens. They became indifferent to terrorist attacks, the tragedies that became commonplace in Kazakhstan in the last 6 months, turning the country from an oasis of stability into a zone of conflict. It seems that the parliament is only devoted to president's messages, and the rest is none of their concern. The MPs of the lower house were leaving the parliament for a vacation with a light heart and didn't want to spoil the mood with the summary of the past 6 months. Even with breaking news around, they never bothered making a single comment or inquiry about the new shooting incident in the Aktobe region. The members of the all-inclusive president's fan club are concerned only with the news that happened on the left bank of the capital.
Ну, террористы видели? Видели, все видели. Что там? Ну, давай туда.
The standoff between gunmen and the special police unit of Aktobe, according to local residents, lasted about 6 hours. 3 young men suspected of murdering police officer Timirbek Jaksalubayev took refuge in house number 46 on Krasnoshokova Street. During the operation, residents of nearby homes were evacuated. Criminals locked themselves inside the house of a famous healer in Aktobe, Kaderata. They refused to surrender and returned fire at the police. Patients who were in the house at the time fortunately escaped unharmed. They shouted, "Get out of the way." They had 2 shotguns in their hands. They came from here, opened the door and entered. People ran away at the sight of the guns. They themselves haven't done anything wrong. During the shooting, 21-year-old Zholmurza Bikbouov and 23-year-old Yernazar Murzagali were killed. The youngest criminal, 18-year-old Gabit Kurmankul, was wounded and is now in hospital. The investigation does not rule out their involvement with a religious extremist group. One of the dead, Zholmurza Bikbouov, was buried in Aktobe this week. He was the alleged ringleader of the gang. His elder brother blames himself, saying he did not pay enough attention to Zholmurza. After the death of their parents, the brothers, along with their younger sister, were raised in an orphanage. Sedek was like a father figure to Zholmurza. I raised him from an early age. He was a good student, even played at a comedy club. He always showed his good side. He chose Islam himself, but who doesn't read the namaz these days? Many bearded men in short pants are roaming the streets. I asked him long ago, what sins do you want to atone for? You were only born yesterday. You're still wet behind the ears. Earlier, 30-year-old traffic police sergeant Timirbek Jaksalubayev was sent on his last journey as well. He was in the force since 2004 and is survived by his wife and a small child. His uncle, law enforcement veteran Tolibay Sarabayev, is certain his nephew died at the hands of extremists. In my personal opinion, it was an extremist group. My nephew was not killed by accident. These extremist groups target police officers to scare the people. Acts of terrorism in Kazakhstan were first recorded in Aktobe. On May 17th of last year, 25-year-old Rahimjan Makatov detonated himself inside the NSC department building. The Prosecutor General's office initially denied the attack. However, 12 people were convicted on terrorism charges as a result. Gang leader Yeset Makhuov was sentenced to 17 years in prison. July 2011, Kinkiak village, Aktobe region. Special forces soldiers conducted a large-scale arrest of a criminal gang whose members were suspected in the murder of 2 policemen. The official version of the special operation carried a purely criminal nature. A gang disguised as religious ideologues was involved in oil theft. 17 people died in the raid at the time. 5 police officers and 12 residents of Shubarshi and Kinkiak. On July 9, 2011, a group of young people was eliminated. 6 were identified as persons responsible for the murder of 2 policemen in Shubarshi village this year. After the incident, local residents' opinions split into 2 camps. Some blamed the police for what happened, saying they overstepped their boundaries. Others said that the amount of dubious believers has indeed gone up lately. The police themselves act disrespectfully when these kids read prayers. What a disgrace. Of course the kids get angry. Those who read prayers are oppressed. Just because we wear veils and read the namaz 5 times a day, our women get beaten and we get mistreated. It used to be fashionable to go to Hajj. I heard people from our village went to Pakistan. It all started from there, hijabs and beards. A new mentality appeared that did not correspond to the spirit of Islam. People began dividing themselves between Muslims and non-Muslims, those who read and don't read the Quran. Kazakhstan is gradually turning into Afghanistan. One can freely get a hold of weapons here. Retired Major General Amirbek Toghusov said internal forces are rich in quality but not quantity. He condemns security forces for not learning anything from the events in Shubarshi, Atarau and Taraz. I do not understand the take no prisoners tactic. Special forces are not occupiers that eliminate enemies, but those that disarm them. I believe they are especially trained. These are simple, impoverished people who find it impossible to live. However, sociologist Gulmira Yeleuova's data diverges with Toghusov's opinion. Results of her research demonstrate that Aktobe region is economically stable. Sociologically speaking, I can say the number of people who report low incomes is less in this region. We conducted a social survey in May, where 30% said they can easily purchase durables without a loan. These are refrigerators and other home equipment. Compare that to 2% in Almaty region. The head of the strategic fund is doubtful that religious extremists are active in the region. Yeleuova bases her words on the results of the recent poll. The vast majority of Aktobe residents, in response to the question, "Who do you consider yourself?" said they were citizens of Kazakhstan, named their nationality, and almost no one talked about their religious affiliation. Adbirgen Kulmenteki's mother was a shaman. Together with his brothers, he is reviving old models of weapons, musical instruments, and household items used by ancient Turks. Adbirgen calls for a return to the faith of ancestors who worship Tengri. The well-known blacksmith is confident that Kazakhstan does not practice Islam in its purest form. What took place in Aktobe, in his view, is the loss of their own religious traditions. Our ancestors also faced the advent of other religions. This can be countered only by natural tradition, art, and culture, nothing more. Other nations as well. Kazakhstan is a young country, so we need to share experiences with others. For instance, the Japanese attach great importance to their traditions, and thus they protect themselves from alien ideas. Internal Affairs officials opened a criminal case on the fact of murder in Aktobe. Investigators plan to test out the extremist trail. The surviving 18-year-old Kurmankul faces questioning.
Заключение выпуска материал о возможном закрытии.
One more story at the end of the show. It deals with the possible closing of the main state museum of Kazakhstan in Almaty and with the transfer of its collections to Astana. Over the past decade, museum collections in Kazakhstan became virtually identical, the president of the country becoming the only valuable piece in their collections.
Действующий президент страны.
In front of you are the sewn patches, parts of clothing, vesties and golden spikelets, which were put into clothes as a symbol of prosperity. Perhaps this is the last summer tour in the Central State Museum. This week, the media reported that the museum will be moved to Astana and its staff will be laid off. The largest historical center of Kazakhstan has 4 research facilities, a library, and over 240 staff members. Academic Secretary Zhomaguz Shalgunbay proudly shows the stand with the scientific works of museum staff and refuses to believe that soon this will all be irrelevant. Compared to other museums, we have the strongest team of researchers working in ours. The scientific potential of our museum is based on the high proficiency of our specialists, the wealth of museum funds. Almost 50% of the publications are based on the work of the funds. Museum director Alimbai Nursan decided to wait and see. He refuses to talk to journalists, saying that he is feeling sick. Museum staff followed the director's example. They see nothing, hear nothing, and say nothing. Internet users speculate on the relocation of the museum and everything else related to it. However, I believe it's too soon to push the panic button. Upon numerous attempts to contact the museum leadership, the first deputy director Beybut Kali Kakhabayev agreed to comment on the relocation of the museum. He emphasized that the museum is a state-owned enterprise and no formal proposals or orders from the Ministry of Culture have been reported. Therefore, these are only rumors so far. If we received an official proposal, of course we would have started writing letters to clarify the situation, yet we did not receive any official notification from the museum relocation. I saw the official letters signed by Yesimov, the mayor of Almaty, addressed to Masimov with a proposal to transfer the museum building to the ownership of Almaty city administration. The reason for this was their plan to establish a multicultural center in this building. Social activist Murat Awezov says that the relocation of the museum to Astana is not a myth, but a carefully concealed project of Almaty city administration. The endless letters to the museum director, I've had a long conversation with him and frankly he is in despair. This is a special type of raid or a seizure with a very unsightly appearance. I believe if this will take place after all, then people, society and intellectuals might lose their patience. This kind of unthoughtful action of the authorities would generate a very powerful and very resourceful protest action of the population. Many people visit the museum during summertime. There are special tours for school and university students, and there are many tourists. Museum visitors negatively responded to the prospect of museum closure. I'm an Almaty resident. I've been to this museum a few times, and I always enjoy it. I always look for new exhibits. I'm confident that it's not right to close the historical museum. It's a so-called jewel of Kazakhstan. This museum contains all of our archaeological and ethnic data. It's a very nice museum and I'm shocked to hear it's going to be shut down. I don't even know what to say. I think people of Kazakhstan should keep this museum for the sake of our children and future generations. The museum is magnificent. There was a time when the Uralsk Local History Regional Museum had 2 exhibition rooms dedicated to the Cossacks and Pugachev's rebellion. The independence and the new orders introduced with it made people of Uralsk forget about the People's War, led by the self-appointed Tsar, about Pushkin, Krylov, Tolstoy, Sholokhov, Stolypin, and others who lived and worked in Uralsk. Nowadays, the Regional Local History Museum presents only one historical figure, the first president of Kazakhstan. There are photographs and full-length portraits, and even the chair which the leader of the nation sat on. It is called Independence Hall. It presents the history of our country and our region, the history of our city and the Republic in general. Memories of Hetman Pugachev and the uprising of Yaitsk Cossacks still remain in a small log cabin, the branch of historical museum. The head of Pugachev's museum, Agul Bagira, complains about the quality of modern museums. During Soviet times, the museums were established and maintained by assigned professionals, and nowadays everything is done by museums' own resources, and it looks all the same. All museums in Kazakhstan were usually established by specialists from Moscow. These were the people with the right approach and historical knowledge. There are professional specialists for this kind of work. Nowadays we do everything on our own. All we have to do is acquire licenses. I'm not saying it's bad, but if you compare the museums, they all look similar. These are the photos with his friends and classmates. He graduated from high school in 1958 with a silver medal. In Astana, the building of the former residence was turned into a 4-story presidential museum. Wearing shoe covers, visitors can see the childhood and adolescence photos of Nazarbayev, along with folders, pens, books, medals, and gifts. Everything that Nursultan Nazarbayev has ever touched. There is also evidence of the President Nazarbayev's noble roots. This is a modern painting, because the description of his appearance is similar to our president. There is a collection of gifts to the leader of the nation from the presidents of friendly nations and Kazakh people at the Museum of Nazarbayev. The president's personal office and conference rooms of higher authorities of the Republic are presented as distinct exhibits. The Security Council of the Republic of Kazakhstan was established to coordinate the activity of uniformed services and is chaired by the president. Here you can see the folders from that meeting, and the mace was used as a symbol of power at the very first meeting. A special place in Astana Museum is taken by the restoration of a golden man by Krym Altanbekov, which used to be an exhibit of the Central Museum in Almaty. Recently it's been moved to the capital, leaving the duplicate in Almaty. Experts say that an external motive for relocating the State Museum was the establishment of a new historical center in Astana, which clearly doesn't have enough exhibits. However, per rumors in the media, one of the daughters of Nazarbayev set the sights on the building of the museum. Her image is displayed in the Central Museum, in a place of honor of one of the halls. Museum staff says that many of the exhibits from a fund of nearly 300,000 may not survive the relocation. However, those who plan to move the museum are much more concerned with vacating a huge building of almost 18,000 square meters in the elite district of the city. This attitude towards museums is inappropriate, and those who don't consider the importance of museums don't take history seriously either, and history will get even with them.
You were watching Vlast KZ on KplusTV channel. These were the main trends, highlights and personalities of the past week. Goodbye.